So we'll do a short reading from Whispers as well. This is demand to find God at any time, anywhere. Teach me, O Father, to find Thee in the cave of my heart, that I may walk with Thee everywhere. Teach me to hear Thee in silence, that I may hear Thy voice beneath outer noises. Teach me to find Thee in inner peace, that I may be with Thee calmly in the midst of outer tumult. Hubbub or silence, tumult or peace, I care not, so long as Thou wilt teach me to find Thee anywhere at any time. Good morning, great souls.
Good morning.
It's lovely to be here and share this satsang with you. I just love that title of this of the reading that Shubha read out, First Things First. And it's funny how, and as Swamiji also writes in that reading, that we've heard this so many times in our day-to-day lives, right? We have a boss who says, first things first, get this task done because a client will get upset if you don't. Or we have teachers who've said, or parents who say, to kids, that first things first, get your homework done, because if you don't, then there's going to be trouble. And of course, the reason why we say that is because the implication is that we have to prioritize that big task, because if we get that done, then of course logically everything else will get easier. And here we have Master telling us, first things first, seek God. Right? And we sort of hear that, and I think all of us in this room know that the purpose of our lives is to find God. But somewhere we sort of have this feeling also where we say to Master, yes, I know, Master, I've heard you say, first things first, I have to find God. But just before I do that, there's a few other things that I need to take care of, So let me just say, and the list is long, right? So the list says, I've got these children and this family responsibilities and this work and this little bit of health issue that I'm having, and I'm going to find God, don't worry, but let me just handle these things, and then I will get to what you're actually telling me to do. And what tends to happen is that sort of our lives tend to become this whole thing of taking care of problems and easing stresses, right? There's always a long list of things to do that we're always working at one after the other, and we're just trying to solve them. And what we observe in our lives is that as we solve a few problems, guess what? Those 2 problems are gone, but then 3 more issues have come up. And then you get to solving those 3, and then 4 more have come up. And then you sort of just get a little bit entangled in this whole drama of life. And somewhere the deep spiritual aspiration that we all have in our hearts, somewhere that sort of takes a back seat. And you sort of don't know why that has taken the back seat, but you sort of wondered that, well, I was supposed to seek God, but I'm sort of doing something else right now. And basically we need help. We need that guidance. And in fact, interestingly, we don't need to look too far for where that help can actually come from. And we actually have, when you see little children, right? When little children need help with anything, whether it is food, or whether it is toys, or whether it is some argument, where do they go first? The first thing, what is their natural instinct? They go to the mother, or they go to the father, they go to the parents, right? Because that is the natural instinct, because they know that the parents have the ability to solve that problem, to give them what they need, but also because the parents also give them that love. And that is the kind of lesson that we need to learn from little kids, that whenever we find ourselves in a situation, we need to turn towards our Heavenly Father and our Heavenly Mother, because we know that they have the ability and the power. That's what Swamiji sings beautifully in that song, I will lift up my eyes unto the hills. And of course, he's talking esoterically as well, because the hills are really these eyebrows. He's saying, I'll lift up my eyes here unto the hills. From whence cometh my help? That's where my help is coming from. My help comes from the Lord who made the heavens and the earth, right? And that's the interesting thing, is that God has made us all. He became us all. He has made the heavens. He's made the whole cosmos. Doesn't He know what we need? Doesn't the mother know what the child needs? And hence it's very, very important that we pay attention to what the Master is guiding us to do. And what is it that we're really looking for in life? When we say that we're looking for something, Master says that there's really only 2 motivations for everything that we do in our lives. One is that because we are seeking happiness, and the other one is to avoid suffering. And that's really, in a way, it's sort of like the mirror image of the same thing, that we're seeking happiness and we're seeking love. Right? Everything that we do, think about it, that's sort of motivated by those 2 actions. And the saints from all the centuries have told us that God is joy. God is that happiness that you're seeking. God is that love that you're seeking. And God is not just joy and love. He is perfect joy and love. You know, we very poetically, I think Swamiji says that we have a God-shaped hole in our heart, and nothing else will fit that hole but God. So, you know, the Master very beautifully also says that God made us from the limitless joy of His being, just in the hope that perchance out of our own free will we will seek Him, and if we seek Him we will find Him and we will play with Him. Isn't that sweet? Just that image. You know, this big question that people have always, why was I created? Why do I even exist? And so many problems. But God created us so He can play with us. And you know, unfortunately, we get entangled in other things, but that is where we ought to really be sort of focusing on. And Master says that, of course, if we have God, life is fun, and without God, life is just a nest of troubles. So, you know, so we understand this, but we don't want this to be only theoretical concepts. We want this to be like practical. And Swamiji was all about practicality, right? How do we implement this in our lives? If we say we want to see God first, how do we make it happen? And the first thing we need to do is we need to say, well, how can I put God in the center stage of my life? He needs to be right there in the middle. So think about it. And just as a fun experiment, let's try this. Let's just close your eyes for a moment. And I'm going to ask you a question, and you have to essentially think of the answer to that question, but it has to be simple, just one word, and don't think about it too much. It's just the first thing that comes to your mind, okay? And the question is, what is at the center of my life right now? Or to put it another way, what is the reason for my existence? Just a one word, the first thing that comes to your mind. Right? Let's open our eyes now. Don't worry, I'm not going to actually ask you what that was. But usually for a group of people, you'd find that everyone has slightly different answers. You know, for some people, the answer is, the reason I exist is because of my children. For some people, it is, the reason I exist is for my family or for my work or for various reasons. And there will be a few people who will say, the reason I exist is for God, right? And what we need to do is that all of us need to have that should be our first answer. When we say, who is at the center of my life, that answer should be God. And what we need to do is we need to design our lives in such a way so that God takes center stage, right? So you literally look at your daily schedule and say, okay, well, God, where is my time with you in this daily schedule? And you know, we have all these appointments and all of these things lined up, but is there time for God there? Yes, maybe a little bit of meditation here or there. Maybe what happens is that appointments take priority, and if we sometimes miss our meditations, we say, oh, okay, well, today I just didn't get the time, you know, I was just too busy doing various things. What we need to do is we need to say, no, if God is at the center of my life, I need to first give my spiritual sadhana, my time with God, the first priority. So think of your day and say, well, okay, morning and evening, whatever time that is suitable, make that sacrosanct. Say that is the thing, that is the time for me and God, and that is it. And in fact, you know, and of course we have, no matter how busy we are, we never miss do we ever miss our breakfast, lunches and dinners, our meals, right? We're always so busy, but we always somehow manage to find a way to eat, right? So in fact, we should have the same thing with our meditations. No matter how busy we are, we should be able to say, you know, I always find the time to do my meditation sadhana. And in fact, we should actually probably say also that, you know, if I don't do my meditation sadhana, well, that's it, bye-bye to my lunch or bye-bye to my dinner, you know. That is not that important, honestly. What is more important is my time with God. And that's what Master says, in fact, in the Conversations with Yogananda, one of his readings, he says that no matter how busy I am, I never ever forget my tryst with God. And you read about Master's life, and he had a busy life. He was really, really busy. But whenever he came back home, no matter what time at night, he would come back, sometimes at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., he would say, that is now my time with God. And he would meditate until it was dawn, you know. So, of course, you know, the reason why he does that is to inspire us to say that is where our priority needs to be. And interestingly, Master says this in one of his talks that if we are too busy for God, what if God became too busy for us? Just for a moment, he says, what if he became too busy? What if he stopped beating in our hearts? Just for that one second, oh, this guy's too busy. Okay, let me also be too busy. He says all those appointments that we perfectly lined up in the day, guess what will happen to them? That's it. It's all gone, right? So we need to be kind of cognizant of that. Now, of course, when we hear this, you sort of say, Ayush, well, are you saying that, okay, now I'm only going to focus on God and on my meditation sadhana, and I'm just going to ignore everything else, right? So my children are hungry and they're sitting at the dining table, and I'm going to tell them, no, I'm doing my meditations and you're just going to sit there because God comes first, you know? Or your boss calls you up and says, where are you? You're supposed to be in this client meeting that we have planned for the longest time. And you say, no, I just decided today I'm going to do a long meditation because God comes first, and you don't really care. I don't really care about you. So now I'm certainly not saying that, okay? So don't get the wrong impression. The funny thing is that God is actually in your child as well. And funny how you might not want to believe it, but God is also in your boss, right? And God is also in the work that we do. So it's very, very important that we start to now segregate and say, well, what are my God-given responsibilities and what are the other responsibilities that I've sort of just created for myself, which are not necessarily going to help me in my spiritual progress. So, meditation and my sadhana, certainly a God-given responsibility. Taking care of my kids, a God-given responsibility. Going to work and supporting my family, that's a God-given responsibility. But spending 2 hours on Facebook, 3 hours on WhatsApp, 4 hours on Netflix, partying and drinking with friends, all of those, guess which column they come in, right? Certainly you know the answer. Those are not God-given responsibilities. So we need to look very, very objectively at our day and say, where is my time going? And you'll find that if your attention slowly turns towards and is focused on the spiritual surge and focus on God, you'll find you have ample time in the day to meditate. And you drop out all the excessive things in life that are really not necessary. And God doesn't want you to do. So take a very harsh look at everything that you do and say, does God want me to do this? And then, in fact, we know the answers to these things, right? It don't need anyone to tell us. So we need to really simplify our lives rather than making it more and more complex. And in fact, we don't need to go too far to look at a role model of a simple life, and that is Lahiri Mahasaya, who's right here. He's our master's master, so our grandmaster. So he led a life of a yogi householder, where he was a Kriya Yogi. Of course, he was initiated by Babaji, and he led that life for our sake, to show that he had a simple job of an accountant. Every morning he would get up, he would go to work, he would spend 8 hours a day, and then he would come back and he would spend a little bit of time with his family, and of course his disciples. He was there to help his disciples, give them Kriya Diksha, and he would meditate the whole night and get back and do it the next day. And think about it, the master, of course, he's an avatar, and he's always in cosmic consciousness. To think that you have to, if you're in samadhi and you have to get up and go be an accountant in an office, I mean, how painful must that be? But of course he's doing it because he wants to demonstrate that a life like that is actually possible. And very interestingly, there's actually quite a fun story in the autobiography of Lahiri Mahasaya's wife, Kashi Moni Lahiri. When in fact she actually became a disciple of Lahiri Mahasaya, and this incident actually occurred after she became a disciple. So she knew what a great guru he was, and he was her guru, of course, she knew he was an avatar. And several months after she got initiated, she actually felt neglected. And she was also playing the drama of being his wife and the mother of his children. So she was feeling neglected, and she was sort of thinking, sort of a little bit of that sort of housewife grumbling. And then so once Lahiri Mahasaya comes into the room, and she sort of catches him and says, you don't pay enough attention to me and the children, right? And you don't earn enough money for our family. What is it that you're doing? And Lahiri Mahasaya looks at her, and then suddenly he dematerializes, he disappears, right? And she is just like, oh my God, what is happening? What have I done? And then she sort of falls on her feet and says, Guruji, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Delusion sort of caught over me. And Lahiri Mahasaya, his voice comes from everywhere, saying, Kashi Moni, I am nothing. How can nothing ever create money that you need, the money that you're looking for. And she says, Guruji, I'm really, really sorry. And then please come back into your physical form. And then suddenly the voice comes from above, I'm here. And then she looks up and he's actually floating on the ceiling. And then slowly he sort of descends down. In fact, he says these words to her. And in fact, I just want to read those out. And he says very sweetly, he says, woman, seek divine wealth, not the paltry tinsel of earth. After acquiring inward treasure, you'll find that outward supply is always forthcoming. He added, one of my spiritual sons will make provision for you. My guru's words naturally came true, she said. A disciple did leave a considerable sum for our family. So it's just a small little example that, if we seek the inward treasure, the outward needs will somehow get taken care of, somehow or the other. Now, of course, when we're doing our meditations and sadhana, but we have a lot of hours in the day to basically to do various activities, whether it's work or family responsibilities, etc., etc. And the one technique which really helps us, and Master tells us that we throughout the trials of the day we have to keep our attention on God, and this technique of practicing the presence of God in every minute of the day is a very, very powerful and very helpful technique. In fact, this is something that Frank Laubach, who's a really wonderful Christian mystic, he was in the early 20th century. So in fact, he was a Christian missionary who had been sent to the Philippines to preach the teachings of Christ. But when he reached the Philippines and the island that he was sent to, he realized that the island people were largely illiterate and was sort of not really interested in what he had to say. So he sort of changed his tact a little bit. He said, okay, fine, in fact, he started helping those people. He helped them to read, to write. He helped them with many, many things just to help them improve their lives. But at the same time, inwardly, he said, maybe this time I'm going to use to actually practice the presence of God. So at every moment of every day. So he first started, he said that every hour I'm going to bring my mind back to God. I'm going to think of God. And then he said, after some time, he said, okay, now every 15 minutes, I'm going to bring my mind back to God. And he said, every minute, I'm going to bring my mind to God. And then after that, he said, at every moment of every day, I'm going to keep my mind on God. Essentially, I'm just going to constantly keep asking God, what is it that you want me to do? What is it, and what is your will? And essentially act in the consciousness that God is flowing through him and that he is the one who is actually acting. And in fact, this simple practice actually transformed him completely. Swamiji actually met him in the 70s, the 60s and the 70s, and he said that he became a great man. He became a really saintly man as a result of that practice, of constantly having God flow through him. So try that. I've experimented with it, and it's hard. It's not easy because the mind always draws you out, but all we have to do, and that's what Frank Laubach also says, he says the hardest thing for me was to actually keep my mind constantly on God. But he said that if I did that, then everything else in my life was easy peasy. He said everything fell into place because essentially God took care of the details. So that's what, experiment with this, try and see, okay, let's just first try, every hour can I think of God at least once? Maybe set a reminder on your phone, maybe those alarms you can have. Every hour by 12 o'clock it buzzes, then 1 o'clock it buzzes. Just take a minute and say, one breath, says God, I am your child, are you with me? You can tell God, I am with you, are you with me? Right? And do that, then maybe do it once every half an hour, then maybe do it once every 15 minutes. Try that practice. You'll find it'll just completely transform your practice and transform your meditations. Because if you're always thinking of God, you're always with God throughout the day, then when you sit to meditate, it's just far, far easier because the mind just dives very, very deep. So you'll see that it really transforms your practice. So do things, your daily outward activities with God, for God. Just surround yourself in that vibration. And you might say, well, this is this all sounds very easy, right, to say, but it's just in practice is very hard to do. But think about it. Like think about Sachin Tendulkar, right? For example, when Sachin first must have taken, when you see him batting, well, he doesn't bat anymore, he's retired, but when we saw him batting on TV, he used to make it look so easy, right? It was just so simple, and you would think, well, that he can do it really well. But what do you think Sachin would have been like when he first held a bat? On the first few years that he actually batted, he didn't bat like that. He had what the reason he became so great is because of his practice. And it's the same with everyone, with Roger Federer or with Lata Mangeshkar or with anyone who's become great in their fields. They have done tapasya, they have practiced and practiced and practiced until it's actually become easy. And that's what Master is encouraging us to do as well. We just have to practice and practice, and then it becomes easier and easier. And don't worry about your bad habits. And sometimes we say, we have these bad habits. How am I going to think of God when I'm, and I have this bad habit and I'm trying to get rid of, but sometimes I get sucked into it. There was a very sweet disciple of Master who was actually an alcoholic, funny enough, and he used to love his whiskey and his drink, and he just couldn't get rid of it somehow. So what he would do was, in fact, he said to himself that I am a disciple of Master, but at the same time I have this habit of drinking. But I can't get rid of this habit, but I can do something better. So essentially he used to sit for his meditation with a glass of whiskey in one hand and with his Kriya Mala in the other hand. And he would do a few Kriyas, and then he would say, okay, well, I need a drink. And he would have a sip of whiskey, and he would put his glass down, and then he would go back to doing more Kriyas. And then he just kept doing that. And after a while, after a few weeks and months, he realized that his Kriya practice was giving him so much bliss, and the bliss was infinitely greater than that little pleasure that he was getting out of the whiskey. He just threw that bottle and glass away. He said, I don't need this because I have my Kriya practice. So do the same. Don't worry about the bad habits and things that we have, but really bring your mind constantly, bring God into the practice. And when we do that, we find that, as Christ promises, he says, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you. Right? So when he's saying all these things, he's not just saying, a little bit of happiness and a little bit of, my children will be happy or my health will be okay. He's saying everything essentially will be added unto you. And that's what happens to Master, of course, when he goes to Vrindavan, right? It's just supposed to be a simple test, but he ends up getting this huge royal treatment, and literally a feast. He says a meal that he has never ever had before. So if we focus our concentration on God, he takes care of the details. He'll give us far more than what we ever need. And isn't that true for a parent as well? The parent knows what the child wants. The parent can redesign the circumstances better for the child than the child can ever design for themselves. And that's the same for God as well. God is not airy fairy. We sort of sometimes things it's all a bit vague and sort of mystical and can't really put your finger. But God is incredibly practical. Think about it. If you have to run the universe and you have to run everything with such precision, don't you have to be practical? Think about the scientific things that are just going on within our own body. It will be made in a very, very practical way. So if God is practical, then he has the power to help us with our practical things as well. In fact, there's another fun story of another disciple who was having issues. He had sort of, I would say, bad financial karma, and he was struggling with prosperity issues. He was just getting poorer and poorer. And he went to Master. He said, I need your help. And Master said to him, okay, well, he said that it's about consciousness. And he said, because it's your poverty consciousness that is drawing these financial circumstances to you. He gave him affirmations. He gave him, several things. So this guy practiced it for a few weeks, and then he came back. And he said, Master, it's not working. These teachings don't work and all of that. So Master said, come here, sit down with me. And he said, I am going to manifest money through you right now, right? And so he makes him sit down, and then he said, okay, meditate with me. So they meditate together. And then when they're meditating, Master calls out to God and he says, God, tell me, how do we do this? And the funny thing is that God, in Master's meditation, he makes him see two houses. And Master knows what to do. So then Master opens his eyes and tells this guy, okay, go and buy those two houses. And this guy's like, buy those two houses? I mean, what do you mean? What are you saying? He says, no, Divine Mother says, go and buy those two houses. So he goes and buys those two houses. And within a short few days, after he's bought those houses, someone else turns up and he says, I want to buy those same two houses. And he makes basically a profit of $5,000. So Master had told him that I'm going to manifest money through you. I'm going to make $5,000 through you. And essentially within a few days, he's able to sell the houses for $5,000. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that we sit in our meditation and ask God for real estate advice. We're not sort of saying that thinking, God, which stock should I buy? This stock is down, I'm not saying that, but I think you get the idea. It's just that if we put our focus and concentration there, then, we draw that essentially blessing. And above all, at the end of the day, we don't want to be loving God for His gifts. We want to be loving God for His love and for her love above all. Think of it, right? A child who keeps asking his mom for, Mom, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this, can you get me this, can you get me this? As opposed to a child who says, Mom, I don't want anything, all I want is you. And because I love you and because I want your love, right? There's a huge difference, because when you say that, what does the mother do? The mother will lift you up and keep you in the arms and say, my child, I have given you everything, right? And that's what we need to do. We need to think of, if we go to God saying that I don't want anything, but I just want your love, you'll find that that's when God gives us Himself. And that's what Krishna is saying in that reading. If you seek lower gods, and when he says lower gods, he's essentially saying seek the things of this world, seek my desires, my attachments, etc. He says you will get them. God wants to give us all of those things and you will get them. But if you seek me, then you will get me. Right? And so in our lives we have to balance those things out and say, ultimately, God, I want you, God alone, which was the motto of Sister Gyanamata. So try and see if you can make that your life motto, make God alone. And we find that when we have God, He gives us everything. And I'll just end with this beautiful saying by this one saint. He said that if you only knew how much God loves you, you would die of joy. That is the sweetness that is waiting for us to come to Him. All we have to do is open our heart and we have to turn to Him. Thank you.